Apologies for having this meeting start with a little delay. The car in which Strobe Talbot was supposed to get here never showed up at Spaso House, whoever was responsible for that. So Strobe took an unplanned, unprecedented trip on the metro.
Not unprecedented.
Okay. Well, it was an experience, especially coming right 1 week after what happened on the metro. But today we are very pleased to have two very interesting guests with us, people who need no introduction whatsoever. So I will introduce them just as a pro forma in a very brief manner. Sitting on my left is Javier Solana, who until late last year was the High Representative of the European Union for the Common Foreign and Security Policy. And prior to that, he served, of course, as Secretary General of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a person who is extremely well known here. And sitting on my right is, of course, Strobe Talbot, President of Brookings Institution and Deputy Secretary of State in the Clinton administration, and also a writer whose most recent volume is now being completed. I will, since we started a bit late, I will cut on any introductory statements I may have wished to share with you. But let me just start by giving the floor to Strobe first and then to Javier. And we're discussing the state of Russian-Western relations from an American and a European, or should I say Western or EU-European point of view. And if I may ask everyone, and I will do it myself first, switch off your mobile phones, or at least make sure that they do not buzz during the session. This session will be held in English, so when you, after we're done with introductory statements, if you want to offer a comment or raise a question, please raise your hand or raise something in your hand and catch my attention, and I will duly give the floor to you. So without further ado, Strobe, the floor is yours, sir.
Are we live, or do I need to turn something on here?
We're live.
Okay. First of all, Dima, it's terrific of you to put this group together. I apologize for the delay in us getting started. And before we go to even introductions, I do want to say on behalf of your American visitors how devastated all of us were by what this city and this country suffered in recent days. It's been on our minds from the moment we heard about it. It was certainly on our minds as we rode the metro to get over here and just looked at Russians and Muscovites looking perhaps a little more apprehensive than they would normally, but going about not just their business but their lives. And so our hearts are with you. Let me just give you a tiny bit of background on the group and our itinerary. I'm lucky enough to be traveling with, in addition to Javier, his wife, Concha Jimenez, and two dear friends from the United States and from California, Leonard Schaefer and Tali Besson. And we had with us until a few hours ago Steve Pfeiffer, who I think is known to many of you, but had an appointment in Oslo that he had to get to. We began our trip in Madrid to pick up the Solanas, and then we were briefly in Istanbul, where we had some conversations pertinent to the region. We were then in Tbilisi for several days. I'll come back to some reference to that in a moment. And then a couple of days in Kyiv. And we're going from here on to Tallinn, and then bringing our trip to a close. I know that from years of coming here to the Carnegie Center and knowing many of you in this room that the best part of the program is always the give and take. And so I'm just going to offer in telegraphic style a couple of impressions, and then Javier will do a few from his perspective, and then we'll throw it open. I guess the city I might start with is the city where at least I began the journey, and that's Washington, D.C. We're in a very interesting time in the U.S., and it certainly has implications for U.S.-Russian relations. President Obama has had, as all of you know, a very difficult first year in office, and one of those difficulties is that he ran into so much difficulty with his domestic agenda that it forced him to put aside to some extent his foreign policy agenda, and much more pertinently, it increased the concern about whether he will be able to deliver the U.S. Congress on some critical pieces of legislation that are necessary for him to implement his foreign policy, notably including, of course, his arms control and non-proliferation policies, where U.S.-Russian cooperation are so essential. The good news is that there is now a New START treaty. We hope that the good news will be that before too long it'll be ratified by the United States Senate, but that is not going to be a piece of cake. It's going to be tough. And one reason it's going to be tough is because in addition to concerns that are going to be raised about the verifiability and a couple of other features of the New START treaty, the opponents of the START treaty tend also to be those who do not want to see President Obama succeed later this year in ratifying the comprehensive test ban treaty. The President is hoping to leverage, as it were, some of the positive energy that results, he hopes, from the passage of the health care bill. And if a lot of you start asking questions about the health care bill, I think I will climb under the table and give my seat to Professor Schaefer, who was an expert on the subject. But suffice it to say, whatever the merits and contents of that bill, it became kind of a monster that ate Washington. We can come back to that phenomenon. Your president is going to be visiting the U.S. Twice in coming months, including, of course, on the 12th or 13th of April, and then coming back for another summit later. My sense is that the personal relationship between the two of them is really quite solid, and I'm a great believer on the basis of experience and what I've observed over the years that personal relations between leaders matter a lot. That doesn't mean there aren't some tough issues. One of the toughest, of course, is Iran, although it's my sense that the feeling in Washington is that Russia and, critically, China, which was playing rather more hard to get, have come together to a degree that will be necessary if there's to be progress on the Iran issue. Javier is a true expert on it. Just two quick words about, or a few quick words about our stops in Tbilisi and Kyiv. I must say that the degree of antagonism, mutual antagonism, between Georgia and the Russian Federation is of great concern to all of us who want the best for both countries. It clearly has some personal overtones or undertones, but beyond that, I think all of us, at least my colleagues back in Washington, and some that we've met on the road, fear that if it is not, if there's not an active effort, including on the part of the European Union and the United States, to tamp down passions, and one hopes that perhaps we have some influence in Tbilisi, as well as having the kinds of relationships in Moscow that would allow us to play some kind of constructive role that situation, which has turned bad for both countries in the recent past, could do so again in the future, and we can come back to that if you want. In Kyiv, I think what struck our small delegation was the extent to which real politics is alive and well in Ukraine. I call him Professor Schaefer, but you can call him anything you want. All right, Professor Dr. Schaefer is an expert in many things, including Chicago politics. And one of the comments he made after listening to a fairly broad spectrum of political figures in Kyiv fight among themselves, he says, sounds just like Chicago. And I think there's probably more good news than bad news in that. The one issue that did come up basically across the spectrum there was over the so-called strategic orientation of Ukraine, and people particularly in the opposition, and we saw the opposition at a very high level. I won't mention any names. Blonde braids come to mind, are explicitly concerned that Ukraine has made a binary choice, that is in a zero-sum context, is orienting away from the European Union and towards the Russian Federation. As one individual, I have the following reaction to that. That strikes me as being doubly unfortunate. First, that there should be seen to be a zero-sum dynamic operating between, well, among, you could even say, the U.S., Ukraine, and Russia. This shouldn't be an either-or choice. And second, it would be too bad if Ukraine, or for that matter, the Russian Federation, were to slow down or change what we have heard many times in the past, and in both capitals recently, is still a commitment on the part of the leadership of both countries, that is Ukraine and Russia, to integrate as much as possible with Europe and indeed with the international community. More specifically, we heard quite a bit about the customs union and a great deal of skepticism in Ukraine about whether it made sense or would be feasible for them to join the customs union, of which Russia and Belarus and Kazakhstan are still a part, and are now a part, and the other concern about the incompatibility between Ukraine's joining the customs union and being a member of the WTO, which kind of teed up an interest that brings us, one of the many interests that we bring to Moscow, which is what are the chances of getting the Russian Federation's accession to the WTO back on track. Again, speaking subjectively, a lot of us hope that that will happen. But with that, why don't I turn it over to Javier?
Well, thank you, Strobe. Now we turn to Javier.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. Thank you very much for organizing this gathering. Let me start with the same sense of solidarity with the people of your country as Strobe started. I was coming here walking, so I didn't go to the subway, but I had the same sentiment of solidarity with the families, with your country, and with the leaders of your country on this complicated moment. I will not start talking from the beginning of this trip that started in Madrid. Let me go a little bit before that trip, and let me start by the last summit that took place late in November 2009 with President Medvedev. It was the last summit I was participating in my capacity of Foreign Affairs Chief of the European Union. Let me remind to you, in that summit, something very important was put forward. Remember that the Partnership for Modernization was launched there, and it was launched with basically 10 points. I'm not going to go through the 10, but it was a really very, very important moment. I was very pleased that that was the last time I participated in that summit. I did my best to get this idea of modernization together between the European Union and the Russian Federation. And I was very grateful that President Medvedev accepted that, not only accepted, but he put all his energy behind that. Why do I say that he put all his energy behind that? Because the next meeting after that meeting in November took place the 1st of April, while we were already in our travel, in the real travel that Straub has mentioned. I have to tell you that that meeting that took place the 1st of April here in Brussels, in Moscow, was very good. And it's going to be followed by another meeting in which the Deputy Prime Minister for your country is going to be in Brussels in the 14th of this month. Now, I have to tell you that never have seen such a dynamics created on a new idea at such a speed. In the meeting that took place the 1st of April, probably you may not know what happened, but basically of the 10 points which are in the package, let me divide it in 3. And it were a good debate and very important agreements on the first line, which, as you remember, is rule of law. And it was an agreement already to begin working on how together we are going to be, well, you are going to be signing and ratifying all the agreements of the Council of Europe in a variety of aspects that goes from all the conventions, sign all the conventions, begin to work on the questions related to reforms in the judiciary, reforms of the law enforcement's accountability, etc., etc. So that has been an agreement to begin doing that, and we are going to continue working on that the 14th of April between the Deputy Prime Minister and the European authorities. Now, the second big is the economic aspects. And the economics, I think, is a lot to be done. We are living in a complicated moment, economic crisis. It still is not over. We don't know when it's going to be over, but we know that the world that day will be very different than today as far as relation of forces, what is going to be the situation vis-à-vis emerging countries, etc. I will not enter into that because you know it very well. But something will be very, very important, and as Trump has mentioned. In order to get out of this crisis well, we need not to fall into a protectionist type of world from the economic point of view. And for that it will be very important that the WTO will play a very fundamental role. I got from President Medvedev in November, and as has been repeated the other day by the Deputy Prime Minister, that the WTO option by the Russian Federation is a real one. And it's a real one in the manner that he wants to get moving rapidly in that direction. Now that is very important, as Straub has said. It's very important for the solution of the economic crisis globally, but it's important for our neighborhood, the relationship vis-à-vis the European Union, but the relations also with neighboring countries. Ukraine is an important one, and other countries of the region. Now the choice between how to handle the so-called customs union and how to call WTO is going to be a tricky point, but I think it's a tricky point that can have a solution if the Russian Federation continues to look really rapidly to the WTO association. We have been in touch with Pascal Lamy, the director of the organization. I think that this is possible, but for that is required really a serious and rapid decision to move forward in that direction. That will help the Russian Federation. We think it will clarify much more the relationship between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, and it will help also to clarify the outcome of the economic crisis. It's very important also the agreement that was reached on the 1st of April, that will be continued being discussed the 14th of April, on the adaptation of the regulatory norms on the economy between the European Union and the Russian Federation. That's the second big package. Let's call it economic. The third big package, which is very, very important, I want to make this, I don't know that I'm going to make first pages tomorrow in the newspapers, but the debate on the science and technology point of the 10, it really moved very fast. And I think we have the possibility of getting the Russian Federation incorporated to the next framework agreement on science and technology that will enter into force in 2012. This is very, very important. You have to know it. No other country than the Russian Federation will be participating in that, with the exception of Israel, which is negotiating the same type of agreement. So we are going to open the framework agreements on science and technology, fundamental issue of modernization, to the Russian Federation and to Israel. And we hope that the seventh framework agreement, that, as I said, entering force at 2012, will be part of we will be participating on it. Now, the other one I would like to mention is the chapter devoted to energy. It's an important decision and debate about how to go to a better efficiency in energy together, European Union and the Russian Federation. As you know, there are some mechanisms for early warning already that have functioned very well. We had years in which they didn't function at all, but the year 2009 has working very well, and we hope that it will continue working very well in that direction. So the energy chapter, I will not insist because there will be questions probably from the audience on the energy sector, but I think we are getting much better than we used to be in 2007, 2006, 2005. Now, let me also say that the people-to-people chapter out of the 10 is moving also. I think we are moving on the visa facilitation. The roadmap is being in place. You know the difficulty that still exists on that chapter, but I think it's very, very important that the people-to-people people-to-people contacts can be facilitated through the mechanism of facilitation, also visas. Now, if you were to ask me what would be, I'm not in office now, but what would be my sensing with the direction should go, is to have in the foreseeable future Russia closer to the European Union, Russia going in this process of modernization together with the European Union, and having as an objective in the foreseeable future to be as close to the European Union as possible. That means everything but institutions. I don't think you want to be part of the European institutions, but with the exception of being part of the institutions, the rest of the relationship could be as close as we want both to move in that direction. Now let me say a word about security. As you know, the idea that have been proposed and put on the table by President Medvedev on the new structures of security is something we are taking very seriously. We have opened a debate about that. We had in the year 2009 a couple of meetings, the last one in Corfu. I think it was a good meeting under the OSCE auspices, and I think very much that the year 2010 could be a year in which we are going to keep on moving on that direction. I don't know what will be the end of this debate, but in any case, I think it's worth getting engaged in this debate on the ideas that were put forward by President Medvedev, and in which, as I said, we have discussed in 3 occasions already. One thing I would like to say, for us it's very important that this negotiation is done with three parties. That means the Russian Federation, the European Union, and the United States, and in 3 baskets: the hard security, the economy, and what we may call human rights. This has to be maintained as the elements that were the basic elements of the Helsinki Act and also the Paris Agreement after 1899. Now, I think that the idea that at the beginning was talked about a sort of Helsinki 2 has been already agreed that is not the best approach, and that we may as well, or do better, if we continue talking or begin talking about a Helsinki Plus. That means the room of maneuver that we have within the framework of the Helsinki and Paris agreements. Now, this is what I can say you and can tell you in such a brief intervention. Tell you that we are very concerned, and but happily concerned for the moment, and as Talbot has said, on our visit in Kiev. As you know very well, I know Kiev for a long time. I was part of the negotiation in Kiev in the year 2003, 2004. I know the leaders of Kiev fairly well, I would say very well. Viktor Yanukovych, I know him very well from the very beginning, 2003, then when he was Prime Minister. I think that it's possible to get also the European Union and Ukraine moving closer. The first visit of President Yanukovych, as you know, was the 1st of March to Brussels. It was a good meeting, and I can tell you that also we are moving in the direction of signing the association agreement, moving on the visa facilitation, and trying to get as soon as possible a very deep and comprehensive trade agreement with Ukraine. The difficulty of that trade agreement may be also in relation with the decision that you have taken to move on, as President Medvedev has stated, to the WTO. If this is not the case, it will be much more difficult. In any case, thank you very much for the opportunity, and very happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Javier. Thank you both. It's been a tale of many cities. And now the time is for questions and comments.
Iranians will really have the nuclear bomb. What American administration will do? Will it be Obama administration or some other administration? And the second question to Senor Solana. We have long discussion with North Atlantic Alliance about the station in Poland, station in Czechia, disagreement with Russia, just now about Romania and Bulgaria. Will it be possible to have the joint venture with NATO and Russia on the question of security? And if yes, when it can be realized? Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Strobe, would you start?
Well, I'm going to amend your question, or at least question or raise a difference of view on the premise of your question. You said, when will Iran have the bomb? Maybe we have no disagreement if you are prepared for the possibility that the answer to that question is never. I gather from your facial expression that we do have a disagreement. I think there is at least a possibility worth doing everything we can to bring about that Iran will not acquire nuclear weapons. Your rebuttal is once again vivid in your face. Javier, I hope will answer this question as well. I think as I just try to distill the speculation, the educated speculation of people in our government and other governments on this issue, there is a center of gravity around the view that there are different factions in Iran, different Iranians want different things. There is at least a possibility that they can be held over time on the right side of the threshold. Now, as for when they can have the bomb, if President Obama, as some conventional wisdom a while back would suggest, is going to be only a one-term president, then I would say they can have the bomb in the administration of his successor. If he succeeds in being reelected in 2012 and serves until 2016, they can perhaps have the bomb during his presidency. But the name of the game should be mooting the question.
Thank you. Javier?
Well, let me, although the question was the second to me, let me say a word about the first. I would like very much that what Strobe had said become true, that it will never, and never in good cooperation between the United States, the European Union, the Russian Federation, China, etc., the members of the Security Council plus Europe, that will working together will prevent that happens, and prevent that happens in a peaceful manner through diplomacy, which is what we would like to do it. Will that be possible? We'll see. But this, in any case, is the will of the countries here represented, the European Union, the United States, and the Russian Federation leadership. Now, on the second thing on NATO-Russia, as you know, NATO is going through a process of rewriting the new strategic concept. And that will take place, or will be finalized during the month of May, probably, with another summit of NATO and of NATO. Now, I would like very, very much to have out of that strategic concept a development with all the potential that we put in it of the Founding Act. The NATO-Russia Founding Act, in which I participated in a very leadership manner with Strop Talbot and with Yevgeny Primakov, I think has still a lot to be developed. And I think through that mechanism, I hope very much that at the end of this year 2010, we'll have the possibility of having a way much better relationship between NATO and Russia. Important decisions have been taken this year that may help in that direction, not least decisions about missile defense, and the decision that has been mentioned already of the signature of the agreement between the Russian Federation and the United States on the START treaty. So I think that the climate is getting better between NATO and the United States, and therefore as a consequence also between NATO and the Russian Federation. And I hope very much that we will be able to get good strategic concepts. I cannot speak on behalf of the NATO, but I will hope very much that all the potential that was placed in the NATO-Russia Founding Act will be able to be developed to the end. I think the debate that will take place on the mediative proposal that I mentioned before, it should also be elements of help on that direction.
Well, thank you. Tatiana, please, can we have it in the front row?
Tatiana Parkhalina, Center for European Security. I also have two questions, one addressed to Mr. Talbot and another one to Mr. Solana. Mr. Talbot, probably you're already aware that last Friday the Ukrainian president he took a decision to stop the work of the Commission aiming at the future integration of Ukraine into NATO. At the same time, you know, when I last time before elections I was in Ukraine, I had the impression that in spite of you see different political decisions that Ukrainian people could take during the elections, they have chosen already the main vector of their future development. And this vector is Europe and Euro-Atlantic. Now, how do you see the perspectives of Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine, having in mind the Russian factor, of course? This is my first question. And my second question, Mr. Solana, is addressed to you. And it concerns Russian proposal on European Security Treaty. The draft that we have now, which was put on Kremlin site before the first visit of NATO, the present-day NATO SecGen in Moscow, Mr. Rasmussen, this is, you see, only hard security. We are aware that you, in Euro-Atlantic, you perceive security through the prism of integration and globalization. The draft which was put on, you see, on the Kremlin site, you see, demonstrates that still in Russia, our leadership, they perceive the security through the prism of geopolitical terms. I know that there are a lot of nice wording coming from different Western political figures and different institutions such as NATO and European Union that in principle, yes, we should discuss this proposal. At the same time, how do you see the perspectives of future negotiations, having in mind all these connotations? Thank you.
Tatiana, first of all, it's good to see you again. With regard to Ukraine, NATO, and European integration, Javier alluded to the very good meeting that we had with President Yanukovych. That gave us, among other things, a chance to hear him elaborate a little bit on his vision of Ukrainian foreign policy, which features the term non-bloc, and he defined that a bit for us and distinguished between non-bloc and non-aligned. But there's no question that in his view, the issue of Ukraine's applying for NATO membership is not on the table. We can set aside for another conversation, including another conversation with President Yanukovych, whether NATO is in fact a bloc, but in his mind, it seems to be. My own personal view, and I think that of many Americans, is essentially relaxed and respectful. It has always been the position of those of us who were associated with the decision to enlarge the alliance that this was a matter of creating an opportunity for countries that wanted to associate and be members of the alliance to do so. Never in the course of this process have the members of the alliance as a group, the alliance as an institution, or the United States gone out and tried to persuade people to overcome their hesitancy and join the alliance. It's always been a matter of responding to requests. There are several countries in Europe that are huge contributors not only to the coherence and integrated nature of Europe, but also to the security of Europe, and yet are not members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I'm thinking of Finland and Sweden, just to cite two examples. Long and short, it's up to the Ukrainians. The important thing is that Ukraine continue in the respects that Javier talked about to strengthen its relationship with the European Union as a whole. My own view is that that process, first of all, I don't think Europe will be a fully realized vision until the largest country in Europe, as opposed to a bicontinental country like Russia, is part of the European Union. So I hope that that process continues. But it will continue smoothly and rapidly only if the process of increasing cooperative and indeed in some ways integral ties continue to develop between the Russian Federation and the European Union.
Thank you very much for the question. One word about Ukraine. President Yanukovych was very clear that the relationship that exists between NATO and Ukraine will be maintained. That means the special relationship that exists, as much as the Russian relationship with NATO, it will be maintained. You remember that that started in 1997 in Madrid, you remember, with President Kuchma. And that has been developed, and it will be maintained, and no step back on that direction. The unity of the country is not clear vis-à-vis NATO, and therefore we will respect the position of the country, and it will be up to the people of Ukraine to decide where to want to continue, in what direction, how far they want to continue, but it's the will of the president to maintain at least the relationship that it has up to now. The second question is more difficult, and I cannot speak but give you my own opinion. As I said in my first intervention, I think that whatever is the result of this debate, I think the debate is useful, and the debate should take place. It should take place in an honest manner, in a frank manner. I think that, as I said, the draft presented to the Secretary General of NATO is a draft that, to my mind, is a starting point, but it will not be the end game. I don't think could be a treaty, formalize, ratify, all that. We have discussed many times with President Medvedev, with Sergei Lavrov. I think to enter now into the negotiation of a treaty It will be a very, very complicated exercise, probably leading not very far. So I think it's way much better to keep on analyzing the situation and where we can make progress. And I think progress can be made. But I want to say once again that understanding that the Russian Federation has the main problem on the first basket, that means hard security, we would like to continue considering the treaty or the relationship or the structure as a three baskets. I think we have to really reflect about that. That is something that comes from long time back, from the 70s. There's no other place in the world, probably, no other region in the world that has today a concept of comprehensive security as we did many years back. So it will be a complete mistake, I think, not to maintain the structure of the Helsinki with the three baskets. Security today, more than ever, more than when we signed it, is not only hard security. And it's not hard security defined in the terminology that is defined even in the treaty put on the table. Hard security today is something way much more different than it used to be, fortunately. But security is also, and we know it every day, other things that have nothing to do with hard security. And we have an example not long ago. We have everyday examples, from climate change to energy security, to non-proliferation, to terrorism. This is a very fundamental element of security. And they are not in the sense of hard security of the first basket only. It's first, plus second, plus third. Therefore, to maintain the three vectors, the three baskets, is fundamental. So as I said, we would like very much, and I would like very much, to maintain the three participants, the three basic columns, United States, European Union, Russian Federation, and the three vectors of three baskets. The equilibrium among the three has to be maintained, although I recognize, because it has been very clearly stated by all the authorities in the Russian Federation, that where they find less comfortable is in the first one. And therefore is where we have to do more effort. Could we do more effort? Yes, we can. Yes, we can. And I think we can because we have the basis already ingrained. We have to develop and develop further, because the NATO-Russia Council, it has a tremendous potential inside that has not been developed. And I think that has to be a way in which developing that, if we could get an agreement that will move in the three vectors to what I call a Helsinki plus, but not a Helsinki 2.
Okay, thank you. Sergei Rogov.
Thank you. Sergei Rogov from the Institute of the United States and Canada. It's a pleasure to see both of you. And of course, I have a question for each of you. One deals with the institutional dimension, which you, Javier, mentioned in your opening remarks. Judging by, at least in my interpretation, by Medvedev's proposal for a new all-European security system, Russia wants to institutionally belong to Europe. But the problem is, as we know, in foreseeable future, Russia is not going to become a member of either NATO or the European Union. We are a member of the OSCE, but it's a pretty vegetarian organization, while the economic, political, and military beef is in the European Union and NATO. So my question is, well, is there an institutional solution? Or in foreseeable future, Russia will remain an institutional outsider, participating in the OSCE, some other European institutions, but not truly a member of Europe institutionally, because to me this is the most serious dilemma which Russia faces. And the question to Strobe, I was very much impressed by the article which you and Steve wrote last week on the New START treaty. And I have a question concerning the possible scenarios related to its ratification. I understand President Obama is now trying very hard to regain the political initiative. And the adoption of the health reform, some movement on the educational front, financial regulation, and of course signing of the New START treaty demonstrates that those who dismiss your president make a big mistake. But when I look at the numbers in the U.S. Senate and the very negative position of the Republicans on practically all items in Obama's agenda, including CTBT ratification, and I think the chances for the CTBT ratification are very small. But with the START ratification, right now Obama needs at least 8 Republican votes to get it ratified. And it's going to be very difficult to get these votes before the November elections. Unless there is a miracle with the schedule in the Senate and it's ratified before the ratification, before the elections. After the elections, apparently the Republicans will regain a few seats in the Senate, maybe not restore the majority, but there will be more Republicans in the Senate, and the new Republicans probably will be even more conservative and tea drinking than the present group of the Republicans in the Senate. So, well, we cannot exclude the chances that the New START may be not ratified. What will happen that? Of course, well, it's a very pessimistic scenario which I'm mentioning, but we cannot exclude it. So what will then happen to reset and the Russian-American relations if we suffer such a setback? As you know, well, in the Russian parliament, apparently it's not going to happen. Thank you.
It's not going to happen, the ratification.
Well, I think it will be ratified simultaneously, as the Russian leaders said. Not earlier, not later.
You want to go first on the...
I'd love to go first. Great pleasure to see you again. Now, on the institutions. One, I don't think that Russia aspires to be a member of the European Union. Is that correct? I went very far today saying that I aspire to have the type of relationship between Russia and the European Union as close as possible without institutions. So apart from institutions, I don't think you're going to be part of the institutions, but you're going to have all the other mechanisms that come along. And, you can call that institution or not. It depends how you want to call it. But you will not. But you don't want to be a member. Therefore, you are asking the question, and you respond yourself. No, we don't. Now, I'm going to say that we would like to go as much as possible, as close as possible, with the exception of being part of the institutions. Number one. With NATO, you have the same position. You don't want to be part of NATO. So you are asking the question. You answer the question. I like to go as close as possible. And I insist once again, even to bore you, that I think the structures were being created time back that have not been developed, or the way that can be developed. And I have spoken, and we have spoken with some of your friends, including with Eugene Primakov. We thought at the beginning it could go further. We still think it can go further, and today even more than yesterday. So it's a possibility not to be part of NATO, because you don't want to be part of NATO, but to get as close as possible. And you can imagine many, many, many ideas, not so crazy, not so far out of reality in which that relationship can work better and can be developed potentially much more. Now, with that, we answer the question to the first basket and to the second basket. To the third basket, you are a member of the Council of Europe, which is represented in a way the third basket together with the OEC, and you are part also of the OEC. I'm very pleased and very happy to have listened the other day, November, President Medvedev saying how he wants to get much more engaged and much more involved in the Council of Europe ratification of all the agreements, etc., etc. So I think that without being institutionalized completely in the sense of being part of all the institutions, a lot can be done in that direction, and we are ready.
Let me just add a quick thought on the way in which you pose the issue of what I would call hard power and soft power. I always pick up useful metaphors from you, Sergei. I suppose one could summarize it by saying vegetarians are from Venus and carnivores are from Mars, right? The serious point there is that, staying with the metaphor, vegetables are good for you and too much meat is not. And soft power has its own role to play in security. And even in the short time that Javier and our friends have been here, we've heard a good deal about Russian modernization, and that does not depend on traditional security considerations so much as opening up the economy and energizing the economy and integrating it with the rest of the world, which is not a vegetarian aspiration in a negative sense, but has a lot to do with Russia's strength. With regard to handicapping the chances of President Obama getting ratification of the New START treaty, I think you are more pessimistic than the sound analysis would suggest. The Democrats do have a substantial minority in the Senate, which is the operative body here. I'm sorry, did I say? Yeah, Freudian slip. Right, have a substantial majority in the Senate. Moreover, the issue itself, that is to say, reducing nuclear weapons, is not controversial in the same way that the healthcare reform package was. It was setting aside the merits and demerits and facts of the healthcare debate. It is so complicated that it lent itself to the kind of broadside opposition that it was subjected to and will to some extent continue to be subjected to. But now that it's in the past, I think President Obama will have some momentum he wouldn't have otherwise. And it is a lot easier in an argument of 2 sentences or less to make the case for why we should have a strategic arms treaty involving reductions with the Russian Federation. You mentioned the negativity, the just say no. Some people are calling it the Nancy Reagan doctrine with regard to the Republicans' legislative strategy. There are some polls suggesting that is not an unmitigated blessing for the Republicans as they head into the fall elections. Finally, there are and you know them, at least some of them. There are a number of members of the United States Senate, Republicans, who are deeply knowledgeable and highly responsible on this issue, and who I think will play a pivotal role in bringing about ratification. I'm more concerned, just speaking personally, about CTBT for reasons having to do both with the complexities and the technical complexities involved, and also the calendar. So I am not going to spend a lot of my time coming up with a plan B of what to do if the New START treaty fails to be ratified.
Well, thank you, Strobe. Konstantin?
Konstantin Eget, freelance analyst and journalist. I actually have one question to both participants, and just would like to hear it from the Washington perspective and Brussels perspective. Critics of both the current American administration and the current EU leadership are saying that the EU and the US today prefer to engage with Russia on relatively easy subjects like nuclear disarmament or energy efficiency, leaving out of the framework questions like, values, human rights, Russian policy in the near abroad, Russian energy diplomacy, Iran, and stuff like that. Do you agree with this criticism? And is it a case of Russia fatigue, or it's a case of the European and the American political class being actually unable, not knowing how to deal with modern Russia? Thank you.
Well, either one of you.
Yeah, I think it was your point.
Both.
Huh? But that there is Russia fatigue in the United States? I want to do justice to the question. There is fatigue in the United States. There is, oh my God, this is an incredibly complicated, dangerous world. Fatigue in what used to be called here ruling circles in the United States. Remember that Barack Obama came into the White House facing an unprecedented, and here the word is justified, unprecedented troubles, quantitatively and qualitatively. A global financial crisis, a global financial earthquake with its epicenter on Wall Street, the danger of not just a recession but a depression, global and in the United States, global issues like terrorism, non-proliferation, and the one I think that preoccupies him the most, even though it doesn't get the most headlines, and I suspect it is not, I gather it's not getting a lot of attention here, is climate change. And then on top of that, you had 2 wars, a stagnated Middle East peace process, the Iran problem, and so forth and so on. And note that I went all the way through that list without ever saying the word Russia. I mean, governments, and I only spent 8 years in a government, it seemed like longer than that at the time, and one of the things that I learned is that governments are a little bit like individual human beings. Even if you have thousands and thousands of people who make up a government can get tired, it can get distracted, it can get preoccupied, because what a government does depends on what the people, and very often the person at the very top, is able to do and think about and wrap his head around or her head around. And in the case of Barack Obama, he's got a lot of bandwidth. He believes very much in multitasking, but he's just got so much on his plate. And I think one of the attitudes he brought with him to the presidency was, my principal concern with every other country I deal with, whether it's a very big country like Russia, or if it's a little tiny country like Georgia, trying to work that into conversation again, I'm most interested in what that country can do to help me and the world deal with all these problems that we've got. Now, to end this on a slightly more positive note, I don't think there is Russia fatigue in the following sense. Russia has a vitally important role to play on virtually all of the issues that have come up here that are global in nature, and Javier has made that point. And even on the issue that has not come up, climate change, Russia can be very, very important. So I think the fact that you now have the START negotiations behind us, that you have the American president and the Russian president meeting on a fairly regular basis, I think both the political will is there, and God knows there's an agenda there on which we can begin to engage more, including on all of the issues you mentioned. Near abroad, there's obviously difficulties with what might be called the inner abroad in Russia, as we have been reminded lately. Certainly energy, certainly rule of law, and things like that. So I actually think we could be on the threshold of a period of intensive positive re-engagement between Russia and the United States.
Are you sure it's really positive?
Well, what would be negative about it? That it would turn into a shouting match? That it would just be talking past each other? That's the only way in which I can imagine it being? Well, I think my sense is that there are the right people on both sides so that that won't happen. There's certainly no excuse for it to happen. All right, my fingers are crossed.
Konstantin, thank you very much for the question. I'll be very frank with you. I don't think there is fatigue with Russia. We cannot afford to be fatigued with Russia. With Russia we have a very important neighborhood and very important strategic problems that have to be solved together. Together between the European Union and Russia, and together between the European Union, the United States and Russia. So we just cannot afford to be fatigued, to get fatigued. It is true, Konstantin, you know it very well, that sometimes with your wonderful country, it's much better to be a strategic partner than a neighbor. To be a neighbor is more difficult than sometimes be a strategic partner. But that doesn't mean that we're going to get fatigued with your neighborhood or with our relationship. Let me repeat what I said at the very beginning. I remember what I said. November 2009, late days, last summit between the European Union and Russia, just about the entry into force of the new Lisbon Treaty, days before. It was the last time I participated because I left a few days after that. April the 1st, the first meeting here in Moscow in which the 10 points of the agreed modernization program went through the analysis with really, if not solutions, but important debates about the most difficult issues. April the 14th, that means 10 days from today, your Deputy Prime Minister will be in Brussels, spending 2 or 3 days, going again through the same thing. So, November and 2 meetings in April. Now, the Treaty of Lisbon in place. There's a new dynamics, really, but it has to be a new dynamics in both sides. We are ready, but you have to be ready also. Now, if the partnership of modernization is real, and we don't have any doubt that is real, the President Medvedev defended in a very strong manner. If that is the case, if we move in that direction, no doubt that it will not be fatigue. On the opposite, it will be enthusiasm. And I hope very much that that will be the case.
Okay. Sir?
Mark Hinton, European Studies Institute at McGill University. First of all, I would like to start with thanking both of you for very positive introductory words. They reflect in a way a possibility of political will to move forward in the relationship between Russia and European Union, Russia and United States. And in this way, both introductory statements are very similar. But there is a deep difference. The difference is that you've talked about relationship between Russia and USA have towards third countries or third organizations. But as far as the bilateral relations, you have concentrated on one major topic. And you have showed that we have started negotiations. In 1 year, we had results. And in comparison with our relationship with the European Union, it's in the same way a proof of a lack of other topics. So my question is, what should we do together to enlarge the dialogue, to introduce into the dialogue economic issues, and maybe how could we think about a partnership between Russia and USA as far as the modernization is concerned? Javier, you have shown that we have 10 topics as far as the partnership for modernization is concerned, and we could move in discussing this topic. But the facts are that we have a PCA, but in a way it is not applied. Then we've started, yes, 2/3 of the provisions. So we've started putting into practice roadmaps for 4 common spaces. Now there is a new conception, partnership for modernization. But what we need are results. They are lacking. So what should we do, both of us, to have results in 1 year, in 2 years, to have real agreements, but to have deeds and not only discussions? Thanks.
Let me start, Dr. Matitsin, with the challenge you put to me. One of the great things about coming here, which I've been doing since the center was first created, is the openness of and the civility of the conversation, including when we disagree. I disagree with your characterization of the U.S. Russian relationship being preoccupied entirely over the last year by the issue of strategic nuclear arms control. Important as that is, I will cite 2 areas in where I think the United States and Russia have worked really quite well together. One is on the Iran issue. Russia played an absolutely instrumental role in bringing about the October 1st agreement in Geneva. Javier can speak to this much more authoritatively than I can because he was involved in the process. Now, that agreement did not last, but that was for reasons that had nothing whatsoever to do with Moscow, Washington, or the European Union. It had to do with the breakdown of the governance system in Iran itself. But that was a big accomplishment with positive implications for the future. I happen to know that on the Middle East, that Secretary Hillary Clinton feels that her recent visit here to Moscow as part of the quartet, also again, of course, involving the EU, was one of the best meetings of that kind. So the 2 countries are working on that. Looking to the future, I agree that there needs to be more in the economy, but I know that there are people in the U.S. government, and here I'm referring to Secretary Geithner, Larry Summers, David Lipton at the White House, who already have engaged to some degree with the Russian government on the WTO issue, which I think is of paramount importance, and are prepared to do so further in the future.
Thank you very much. I mean, you can rephrase the same thing in different manners. The PCA is being renegotiated. You can rephrase the PCA through the modernization plan, although the PCA is broader. And you can rephrase it through the 4 spaces, or the number of spaces that you want to put. Now, I want to tell you very frankly that on the PCA negotiations, which is another way of looking at the same process, a lot has been achieved already. We have a problem where we are not moving very fast. In fact, we are practically stopped. It is very, very important, which is the economic and trade chapter. But that, to tell you the truth, is not because we don't want to move. It's because you don't have your mind clear. Russia still, regardless of what you say, is not a mind clear about how far you want to go in WTO. And it will be very difficult to move on that vector of relationship on economic relations without clarification on WTO. You know how difficult it's going to be. We are not going to accept to enter into a customs union or negotiate with a customs union that will have to renegotiate again in WTO all over again. That has to be clarified, and I think that what President Medvedev said in November, it has to be really implemented rapidly, that decision. Now, when we heard some noises from the last meeting of the Prime Minister of Kiev here, saying that the WTO still is not quite decided, that no doubt creates difficulties, because you know very well how difficult technically, not even politically, technically it would be to enter into full-fledged negotiation without clarification of what is going to be the end, if it's an agreement of the European Union with members of the WTO or with a customs union, which will not be at the end with members of the WTO. Technically it will be such a fantastic, stupid work that is not worth it. Now, we would like very much to move in that direction as fast as possible. But to tell you the truth, I think that the ball on that issue is more in your court than in ours. We maybe want to enter in some difficulties on some issues, agriculture or services, you name it, but at least it will be the mechanism in place and the will in place to resolve.
Can we have
Now,
the-
Iran, I want to repeat, I mean, to underline what Straub has said. The cooperation I always found in all the negotiations with the Russian Federation and his representative in the group has been really splendid.
There'll be a
With Kisseljak at the beginning, and now with the substitute of Kisseljak.
Sorry, there'll be a follow-on question from Sergei Rogov.
Thank you, Dmitry. You're absolutely correct about our cooperation on Iran. Today, Russian, American, European position is extremely close, but Russia is not given much credit, at least in the mass media, and the old accusations that Russia is playing a dirty game, supporting Iranian ambitions continues. And that leads me to the question on 1, 2, 3 nuclear deal. Are there any possibilities that the deal, which has been frozen after, was frozen after the Russian-Georgian war, could be revived? Because, well, this could be one of the areas when we really can have serious cooperation, mutually beneficial. But as far as I could see, it's not even mentioned today. Maybe I'm wrong. 1, 2, 3 nuclear deal. That's
It's the enabling legislation for peaceful cooperation. I think it's probably just as well, Sergei, that it's not mentioned, because if it were mentioned, it would be mentioned in unhelpful ways. I have never been a great fan of this kind of linkage. If I had a magic wand, which I do not, I would wave it a couple of times. The Jackson-Vanik Amendment would disappear once and for all, unlamented, or maybe lamented by people who I don't care if they lament it. And I think the kind of linkage you're talking about exists, and it has a long history, and that history should have taught us to be careful about it. Other things are going to have to be unfrozen for the 1, 2, 3 thing to be dealt with. That doesn't mean it's going to have to wait until the Russia-Georgia issue is resolved in all of its aspects. That's going to be quite some time, to put it mildly. But it's nonetheless, I think that I think perhaps you're missing some of the positive commentary with regard to Russia's help on the Iran issue, which of course Russia is doing because its own interests are so much involved. And let's see how U.S. Russian relations look 3, 4 months from now, when there's, I would hope, START ratification is behind us and the presidents have had 2 summits.
Okay, there's a question here and a question on the back. First, my left, Roy.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this very interesting briefings, and thank you, Dmitry and Carnegie, for giving us this opportunity. I would like to ask.
Roy, would you identify yourself?
Yeah, of course, Roy Rosenblit, Embassy of Israel to the Russian Federation. I would like to ask 2 questions. First of all, to follow on maybe the third hint just given by Mr. Talbot, and this is a question to him, about Georgia. You mentioned in the beginning that the EU and the US have maybe to help to reduce passions between Tbilisi and Moscow. How is that possible, and what if they don't? This is one question. And the second question is about the maybe shorter term after the signing, hopefully this week, of the post-START agreement. We are going to we have the Iranian issue on the table right now in the Security Council. Later on, we have next month the NPT review conference. What can be done in the aftermath of this closer or during this closer cooperation between Russia and the US on those 2 issues? I mean, is the review conference going to be maybe more positive in setting up or in strengthening the non-proliferation regime? Is the Iran issue going to come to some conclusion that will be positive for all of us? Thank you.
On your first question with regard to Georgia, and I don't want to overstress the role for outsiders to play in this, because in the final analysis, it's really up to Russians and Georgians and the Russian government and the Georgian government to work on. But I would hope that in the period ahead we could see a couple of things, both a positive and a positive negative. I'm beginning to sound like Don Rumsfeld here. But the positive would be an effort that I hope would not make a lot of news, to have quiet discussions between Georgian officials, Russian officials, Abkhaz officials, and South Ossetian officials about how to make the best of a bad situation. The bad situation being that South Ossetia and Abkhazia are part of the integral state of Georgia, whose territorial integrity should have been preserved throughout the tensions of 2008, but was not preserved. That is a fact. It is a new, as they say in your part of the world, it's a new fact on the ground. But it's a fact the troublesomeness of which can be mitigated over time if there can be very practical arrangements to get people moving back and forth, a certain amount of commerce going and that kind of thing, and who knows where that might lead down the road. That would be a way of unfreezing the most frozen of all conflicts in that region. The other thing has to do with the tonality of the relationship. And I was well aware before I came on this trip at how intense the anger in both directions was and how personal it was. I think, though, one reason we have political leaders is to hope that political leaders will be able to transcend personal passions and think about what is best for their countries. And that goes for both sides here. And my hope with regard to Georgia in particular, and having just been there with Javier and with our traveling companions, Georgia actually has a pretty good story to tell in a lot of respects, especially when the R word doesn't come up. R word being Russia. As soon as Russia gets into the conversation, it becomes kind of, you know, fist shaking and so forth and so on. And there's a version of the same phenomenon on the other side. And so I would hope, just to cite one very specific example from recent past, and this is a negative, that there would not be television shows of the kind that scared the hell out of an awful lot of Georgians who thought, oh my God, their country had been invaded again. I assume you all know the incident that I am referring to, and I would just cite that, since it's out there in public, as something that I would hope all Georgians would look at very hard and say, that wasn't real smart, that didn't help our situation at all, and start talking about all the good things that are happening in that country. And by the way, you know, Georgia is making is going to be the largest per capita troop contributor in Afghanistan, in Helmand province, no less. They've taken some Guantanamo prisoners. They have a lot of reason to look forward to a good relationship with the United States. But here's what the United States does not want to have happen. First of all, the United States does not want to see the principle of territorial integrity and the sovereignty of countries violated, as happened and continues to happen in the South Caucasus. But another thing the United States does not want to have happen, and this goes back to Konstantin's question about Russia fatigue, it does not want to be drawn into the middle of protracted, bitter, and dangerous difficulties between Russia and other former republics of the USSR. And I think that it's in the interests of both Russia and Georgia that the United States be able to concentrate on the two bilateral relations and not feel that it's caught in some sort of zero-sum trap with regard to the two of them.
In inspection and verification mechanisms between the would-be signed treaty and the past agreements, and just using the occasion to tap on your past diplomatic experience. We heard Russian officials saying that the new treaty, the new START treaty, will be less intrusive in terms of verifications verification measures, particularly inspections. In your view, could it somehow be an impediment to the congressional ratification of the new document? Thank you.
I must say that your question takes me back to the youth that I share with Sergei Rogov. You know, that's up to our chairman. I remember at one point last fall reading and talking to people, and all of a sudden here came this phrase, telemetry encryption, and I felt 30 years younger, just right there on the spot, a phrase that I never expected to hear again. But it's a serious issue, obviously. It's a serious issue both in terms of the verifiability of the agreement in both directions, and also, as you allude to, it is a serious issue in the Hill. And I think actually that is one of the issues that the American people, God help them, are going to get quite an education in. I have a pretty clear idea of what the provisions are in the New START treaty. They are different from those that prevailed in the past. Those differences are appropriate. They accord with the way the strategic programs have evolved. They will provide for that information which is necessary to know for purposes of making sure that the provisions of the treaty are being observed. Make one last slightly ironic comment. A senator who has already started to attack the treaty on these grounds is a senator who embraced and endorsed enthusiastically the Treaty of Moscow, so-called, which had zero verification provisions. So yes, this is not simply a replication, particularly on telemetry, of what was there before, but the adjustments that have been made, I think there is a very strong, and I believe what will be a convincing case to be made that they are adequate.
Okay. The question goes to Colonel Kulakov. Are there any more people who have Igor? And then we'll have to draw them
So
on.
Colonel Kulakov, Moscow Defense University. So my question will be for both of you. So you both are former high-ranking officials responsible for foreign policy and policy in general. And so looking back at your past, at what you did, just what, to your mind, to your point of view, could have been done differently or might have been done differently? So, and then for you, Sir Javier Solana, so you are very, so with your name, so your name is associated with NATO expansion. So you know that at the same time, so you are very popular with the Russian politician elite. So how would you explain that? Thank you.
How do we explain?
NATO expansion. NATO expansion.
And the second thing, the second part, after that you said something else, right?
And you're popular with the Russian politicians.
Ah, I see.
So you were not being ironical. You were not being ironical. You were being serious.
Javier, would you
Oh yes. I think that let me praise the Russian elite. They are very intelligent and they know who their friends are. Now let me be very serious. I think that the first NATO enlargement, the one I participated, it was very well thought and very well discussed with you. Being with your country, with your leaders. We spent many, I would say, years, and then months, years talking, and months debating. I remember when I started debating, rewriting the agreement, the Founding Act, with Eugene Primakov in January. We finished it in May of the same year. That means that we had worked a lot before. The climate was ready, the situation was ready to do something in a very short period of time. I think that was appreciated no doubt by Mr. Yevgeny Primakov. I was with him 2 days ago again, and I see him whenever I come here. we maintain a very good friendship. I think we did a good job, honestly, in that. Now, I cannot say anything else about the future. Then I left, and I've been working with Russia from the European Union. Let me say that I was very proud that I get your country engaged with also without having any institutionalized relationship in Chad. In the military operation of the European Union we did in Chad, the Chad Republic, we needed some helicopters, you remember probably. And we obtained those helicopters after some discussions, very short discussions that I had with your president. So I'm very glad that these things happened and happened. When they are well done, produce some results.
Okay, Strobe.
Colonel Kulikov, you're sparing me having to reconcile any contradiction between my own involvement in NATO enlargement and my popularity with the Russian leadership, since we'll assume there is none. Well,
your books, Strobe, your books.
If this is not immodest, let me say that I do bear some responsibility for NATO enlargement. And I wrote a book about it, and I'll be happy to get you a copy of it. And I think that one reason that Javier has been able to reconcile what you talked about is precisely because of the way in which he conducted those negotiations. And I had the opportunity to be with him and to watch him as he did it. In the final analysis, these great affairs of state, including relations among great powers, have come down to the way in which individual human beings interact. And not only did Javier set an extraordinarily high standard for that, but so did then Foreign Minister and then later Prime Minister Primakov and President Yeltsin, and also quite a number of people who wore the uniform that you're wearing. Which brings me to a point that I want to make about a regret that I have and a hope that I have for the future. I do not think that during the Clinton administration, and certainly during the subsequent administration, that we, the member states of NATO, did as much as we could to give real meaning and substance and productivity to the NATO-Russia Council, and in particular to the kind of work that could be done between people like yourself in uniform on all sides. I think that there should have been more invested to make that a meaningful conversation, and not just a meaningful seminar, but actually something that would have produced some narrowing of the gap of strategic perceptions and perhaps even some joint programs. And I think Exhibit A for that is missile defense. And I think while some time has been lost with regard to missile defense, there is still plenty of time left to test the proposition that work can be done on missile defense in the NATO-Russia Council that will be useful in all kinds of respects, including bringing the Russian and American positions together closer for whatever the follow-on is to the New START agreement, and also for purposes of dealing with Iran.
Okay, the two very last questions go to Igor Zevelov, just in the middle here, and then Pyotr Topechkov.
Igor Zevelov, MacArthur Foundation, Moscow. The first question is to Mr. Talbot. You didn't mention Afghanistan and cooperation between Russia and the United States in that area. Do you think it has any potential as an important area of cooperation for further resetting the relationship after the START Treaty signed and hopefully ratified? And the second question is to Mr. Solana. Russian hard security concerns is a factor of Russian thinking about its relations with the West. And in your remarks and answers to the questions, you suggested a traditional EU comprehensive approach to the relationship with Russia. I really appreciate this approach, but wouldn't it be better to think about taking out these hard security questions that make the development of relations in other areas so difficult, to take out of the equation and finally address them and thus allowing other areas of cooperation develop? Thank you.
My answer will be very brief. You're absolutely right. Yes, I should have mentioned cooperation between the United States and the Russian Federation on Afghanistan. I know from my dealings with our political and military people who are dealing with that wretched problem that Russia has been extremely helpful, particularly with regard to transport access. And it is an example of yet another thing that has been going on, and I hope will continue as long as necessary.
Javier?
Very, very. The answer to your question is yes. To the question posed to me, it's yes. Now, the question is that the European Union alone cannot solve that question. The first vector, the first basket, we can cooperate, but we are not the only player to solve it. It's NATO also. And that's why I insist so much in the NATO-Russia cooperation structure that we have. They have potential to be, to be developed, and I think with good, good preparation, good work, the problem of hard security could be resolved there.
Well, gentlemen, those were the questions. Let me thank both speakers, Javier and Strobe, for very wide-ranging, very thorough, very open and candid discussion. And let me start by let me lead by giving you a good round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you. That was super. Well done. Thank you.
Hi. I owe you a